Welcome to Growth with Portia, a weekly conversation for your personal and professional growth. Here is your host, Portia Booker.
Hey listeners, welcome to Groove with Portia. I'm your host, Portia Booker, and yes, this is my real name. So, question for you, did you bring your curious mind today? If so, I don't want to keep you waiting. Let's dive in. This conversation is number 7 of the part 2 series of honoring my beloved mother, Sharonne Lopez, who made her transition from Earth on July 7, 2022. So today I'm joined by what I would call a professional advocate who is on a mission to empower and equip individuals with resources to keep their lungs with the functionality of inhaling and exhaling with ease. So welcome, Director of the Asthma Center at Cleveland Clinic and National Board Member of the American Lung Association, Dr. Sumita Khatri, who will go by Dr. Sumita for this conversation. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing so well, Portia. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's an honor for you to be here and really share from your perspective this area that has been a part of your life too, because I did have an opportunity to listen to a podcast that you were on where you talked about how you really got into the study of medicine, in particular with lungs and functionality. So this is truly an honor for me. So Sumita, for starters, I always love to start off my conversations with gratitude. What are you grateful for today?
Oh my gosh, I'm grateful for the friends I have and the new friends I'm making. Thank you, Portia. And that there is something beyond what we realize that brings us together. And that is to also empower people and be of service to them. So that's what I'm grateful for.
I can definitely relate, Samia. I mean, I would have never thought a year ago that this is the seat I would occupy in life. One, without my mom, but like the saying goes, sometimes when others exit from your life, they're replaced with a plethora, and you just never know how in your life things will make a full circle. I love to tell people karma is not what we think. Karma isn't just for good and evil. It's also in terms of our life journey.
Correct.
So I'm forever grateful to encounter new people, help others to really grow, and also feel empowered by knowing that there is an alternative for them instead of following kind of that same narrative. So, Sumita, I want to talk about this really quick. You know, when I talk about education, there tends to be a lot of misconception, as you know, being a physician around health and just lung health in particular. So can you shed some light on what are the common misconceptions that people have about lung health? Do they think that allergies don't affect them? What are some common misconceptions from your standpoint, that you can share with our listeners today?
Well, many things. The good news is if you find that you're short of breath or you're wondering if your lungs are not doing well, the sooner you seek care or seek knowledge to figure out what's going on, the sooner you'll feel better. I think there's a overall overwhelming culture, and I'm also guilty of that. I don't want to really ask the question because I don't want to know the answer, right? Because it's probably the worst of the worst, because I think we've just seen a lot of that. And what I am trying to really socialize really with even this conversation is that just find out why you're not feeling quite right from a breathing standpoint, because the sooner you find out, the sooner you are on the path to feeling better. So taking our lungs and our breathing for granted is a misconception, because people will be like, oh, it's just I'm tired, or I'm stressed, or oh, I did this to myself because I smoked. I'm so embarrassed. So they're worried about the stigma. And I would say there's a reason I went into pulmonary medicine, because by and large, people in pulmonary medicine are really approachable, kind people. They're not going to hold, just blame you for what you have perhaps, had some habits or exposures, but haven't we all? Bottom line is, what I'd like to say is that seek care early and you'll be empowered to do better. Back to that empowerment theme that you're bringing up.
And thank you for sharing that, Sumita, because I think oftentimes, and you hit the nail on the head about us being afraid to ask that question, right? We tend to go right to what I call the hamster wheel of shame.
Yes.
Of, oh, well, I used to be a former smoker, or I used to not practice mindfulness, or, if we're someone who works in an environment that requires us to maybe wear protective gear to protect our lungs, for example, our first responders and we haven't been practicing those safety measures, that can also bring on kind of some shame and guilt and stigma.
So true. So true. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because you have to go in realizing that you need this knowledge to feel better, and that really everyone's human. And to be honest with you, often physicians are a lot, more understanding than one might think. And by the way, physicians are people too, practitioners are people too, and someone could have a bad day, but find the person with the relationship that you can continue.
Absolutely. Tenfold, Sumita. And I think too, when it comes to us as people, we growing up, right, we watch TV and see actors, actresses, and people who are on the celebrity end. And we tend to continue to take that same ideology that they're untouchable, even when it comes to having a relationship with your physician. And so I'm glad that you brought that up, Sumita, because I think we need to kind of demystify that and, recognize that we're all human. We all bleed the same color blood, and that we have people like you who are here to really be that resource, that platform to help us to eliminate that ideology and thought pattern.
Correct.
And so, Sumita, I got to ask this for our listeners who are tuning in. What would you say is the first step that they can take to take away that ideology or thought that they feel ashamed and guilty to ask a question or state, hey, I haven't felt as though I'm getting enough oxygen? What do you think it will take for us to really encourage more people to ask those tough questions instead of continuing to live life as though they're normal?
A lot has to do with the company we keep. So if you are around people who are well-wishers or neighbors or church friends who may have an ideology where it is your own fault that this is happening, I would suggest, first of all, not going to them for advice. And just remember, you are you, and it's up to yourself to find the soft place to fall. And instead of going to the people who might not understand the field of medicine or are themselves afraid, those are not the people to ask for help. So there are so many other maybe friends and family who may have had some lung conditions, and just going to them humbly and asking, I know you went through this. How did you do it? Who did you go to? Because now I'm going through it and I just want to learn from you, and then I can help you too, right? So it becomes a two-way street. And also there are many nonprofit organizations like the American Lung Association. Even before this podcast, I was like, okay, what if I were to look up something? And like I looked up lung cancer, and I saw how quick and easy it was to find the resources you needed on that website. It's easy. And it really simplifies it to the point where it's not a mystery. And when they explain it to you, you realize, again, no judgment. That's one of the things that make me the most proud about being part of the American Lung Association, is that there is no judgment. There is no stigma. Knowledge is power. So those are the two things I would say, because I know there's a lot of chatter, right? Especially around COVID and everything. There's so much chatter coming at you. Well-wishers, friends, media. Cut through the noise and go to the sources that matter.
Oh, tenfold, Sumita. I mean, I think we tend to, because there's so much information out there, right? We're on social media 24/7, and there's several that we occupy, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. And then we have sometimes that circle of friends who are like, well, I went this route. Then another one says, I went that route. So it's overwhelming to try to really figure out the simplicity, right?
Correct. Yes, so true. And it is, just as in life with any other challenge, like who do I invite to a wedding, right? Everyone's going to have a million opinions, and you just have to just go to somebody that has your best interest at heart.
I agree with that 100%. And I would also even stress to our listeners, go to the credible sources. I mean, you hit the nail on the head.
Yes, credible sources, not the storytellers.
Yes.
I'll just call it that for lack of a better word.
Yeah, because the credible ones is where you mentioned it. You get a more what I would call itemized breakdown instead of here's part of the story, but here's all the way to the solution. But let's start from the very initial problem and then work to the solution. Exactly. Instead, we have the solution. I'm like,
get on our bandwagon, believe this non-real thing. And that wow, if that hasn't become a huge challenge for medicine, the medical profession, I don't know what has. It's been challenging. When at the very beginning of the pandemic, everybody understood, they trusted medical professionals, and then wow, it didn't take long for that pendulum to whip back. It was like whiplash. What just happened here? So we get it. We have to gain trust every day in a medical profession.
Oh, 100%, Shamita. And I have worked in healthcare for 10 years, and I thought about how difficult at times this must be for physicians like you who are really trying to find that balance of all the information out on the webs, and then also maintaining the same amount of respect from the standpoint of what you do and empowering and equipping people with those resources. Right. So I can definitely agree about the challenge. So we're going to take our first quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. I'm joined remotely with Dr. Sumita Khatri. We're just having a great conversation, of course, about empowerment and providing resources to the community. So, Sumita, I gotta ask this. You're a physician, and physicians have a lot of responsibilities throughout the day. And you had mentioned in our last segment about trying to really keep clarity amongst all of the major platforms that are spewing not so credible information.
Right.
And so, Sumita, how do you prioritize being present with each one of your patients despite having so many responsibilities in order to build that organic rapport?
What a wonderful question to ask, because I've been reflecting on it. It is kind of crazy some days, and you want to clone yourself and be in 10 different places at once. But like, for instance, in the outpatient setting, let me just give that example that, when I'm about to walk into a room, I do a little tidbit search in the chart before I go in, and I, try and think about where are they from? Oh, they came from far away, or they're just from around the corner. So right before I open the door, I knock and I open the door, I'm kind of just excited to meet them. Like, I was like, I wonder who's going to be in there, who's going to be with them. And as soon as I walk in, and that they're just waiting for that door to open, right? They've been waiting. Maybe I'm running up behind, because again, that happens, right? So I walk in and I'm like just excited to see them. Oh, thank you for coming. Who's this here with you? How do you belong to them? Because I've made the mistake of saying, oh, is this your daughter? And it's their wife. So I don't do that anymore, right? So, and then, we have some chit chat, and, there's always shoes and jewelry to talk about, if men and women. Then I'll just sit down and I'll log on to the computer and I'll say, give me a minute. This is warming up. Because what happens is once they start talking, I need to keep notes because I need to remember the whole cadence of their story. So I'll say, just give me a minute. This is warming up. And then I will turn directly to them and I'll say, so tell me why you're here today. More importantly, tell me what you would say would make today's visit wildly successful. So that's what gets them down to, all right, I'm really just tired of being short of breath, and this is what's been happening. And then I'll say, okay, these are the things we need to talk about. All right, tell me your story. And what I do at that point, literally, because I have to take notes no matter what I'm doing, like even grocery lists like 10 times over. So I will be typing without looking at the keyboard, and I'll be just writing down free flowing what their story is. And I'll be listening for cues. And even if I have a question that needed clarification, I'll just put star, star, star in my notes to know to come back to it so that I do not derail their train of thought. And Portia, I think that is the magic. That is the secret sauce to my practice, because many times patients will say, you're the first person who's ever listened to me. I'm just sitting here going, well, that's kind of sad, first of all. And second of all, well, that wasn't that hard. And so they feel like they're able to tell me what they need to tell me, and I'm listening intently to their symptoms because I know usually how they're feeling. I've had asthma. My father actually died of lung cancer, and he was very short of breath at the end of his life. And so shortness of breath is something I hate. So I pay attention, and then I ask those clarifying questions, and they're like, yes, that's exactly right. And so then we come up with a plan together. So it's very personal, very personalized, and it's a relationship. It's really organic, but it's also intentional because over time of 22 years of practice, I just don't know how to do it differently.
I love, Sumita, how you brought up intentionality, because I think that is the approach that tends to garner that organic connection, that opening up, that feeling of someone heard me, someone listened to my plight. And so, Sumita, I got to ask this. How do you intentionally, or how do you find the right combination, per se, of questions to really pick back those layers of some of your patients who this is their first time seeing you, but maybe they've had several encounters where you're the one to finally fix or mend the brokenness?
I actually often use the words, I didn't really look at your record that deeply because I did not want to be biased. So even if I'm asking questions others have asked before, I just want you to know I'm listening with fresh ears. So that way they're not like, well, why didn't you look at my chart? Because a lot of people say that. I'm like, well, because the chart's not always right. So I want to hear it from the source. And often what I get is I never thought of it like that. And it's like aha moments start happening on both ends. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I'll tell them, look, I have some ideas based on what you told me. How about these options? Which one would you like to try first? Should we do it all or should we do it stepwise? So there's a lot of back and forth. I like providing choice to people. I often even say, like, I start getting these light bulbs that go off in my head, and I'm like, okay, guess what? I have a really great idea, but I'm not going to bring it up just yet. I'm just going to hold until we finish talking, but I'll take notes because I do lose my train of thought often. So I have to write it down. But they see that I'm actively thinking. They see the wheels turning. And then, to be honest with you, I see them easing. I mean, the body language changes within seconds. And then it just feels so good to see that.
Oh, I'm sure, because it's that sigh of relief. Like, yes, I hit the right pressure point and nerve to finally stop their armor of defense from being up, where we can move forward and gain some traction here.
Exactly.
And so, Sumita, I have to ask this for our listeners who are tuning in. What tips can you leave for patients who maybe you're their next stop or another physician in the lung specialty to be open? What tips can you leave with them when they've been through the mill of several different physicians and now they're being open to giving a new one a chance? What tips can you leave with them today?
I would say come in prepared to tell the story of who's seeing you, but more importantly, come prepared the story of how you felt over all those years, like your symptoms and how you felt, kind of just really timeline wise. And it doesn't have to be to the date, but just, how did things start? Like I always ask me, tell your story since you were children, because, lung conditions don't happen overnight. Usually they happen over time. So start thinking back and your timeline. Also, then be prepared to say what interventions you had. But honestly, it's very disarming for the physicians too. If you say to them, look, I'm here because a lot of people have tried to help me. I've done everything I can, and I feel like they've done everything they can, but it's not working. So I'd love for you to think sort of with a blank slate for me. Even setting that expectation for us helps. And that tells us they're open instead of being biased, like again, a lot of people come with a misdiagnosis or they've just suffered so much and it's been okay, but not great. And I'm not saying I figure it all out, but we might figure out a different way to manage the same condition.
And thank you for shedding light on that, Sumita, because I think in our society, that tends to be a defensive mechanism for people when they've gone to several different physicians in the same specialty, whether it's local or out of state, virtual now since telehealth has boomed, and they feel a sense of they have to put up that shield because nobody's heard them from the get-go.
Yes.
And that's why I wanted to really shed light on that, because I know that I was once in that boat before, right? When I was having my skin had broke out in this crazy psoriasis rash like last year, and I went to several different people to address it, and I was just getting kind of the runaround a little bit. But then when I opened up, right, when I said, well, I've been very stressed at work from the long hours, from the change of being in-house to now remote, then the doctor was like, oh, it sounds as though this is more of a stress response instead of you're allergic to something, which they did do several blood tests to make sure I didn't have kidney failure or celiacs or lupus. There was several things, and I was grateful that they went to that extreme, but no one else had did that. So it was scary for me. I'll be honest. I'm like, oh, great. Like, what's going on?
Yeah. Oh my God, those tests better be okay, right?
Yeah, literally talk about sweating. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm like, what's going to happen here? But I'm grateful because you see me standing here now being able to live to tell the tale with you. And so I think for our listeners who are tuning in, really stressing the importance of being open.
I agree. And I've been on the receiving end of healthcare, with my kids coming into the doctor, and it is frustrating when you're not being heard. I mean, and so I imagine, see, this is another thing is when I'm listening to their stories, it's very hard not to like feel it with them. It's just an issue for me. Okay. My dad was an empath. I'm an empath. I mean, there's just no way around it. So I just blurt out, man, that's frustrating. And then just hearing my reaction being like echoing their feelings, they're like, yeah, I know. I'm like, shouldn't have happened like that. We'll try and do better.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And, I can definitely attest to being somebody in that boat of, why isn't this working? My skin is aching. My skin is breaking out and it itches, it burns. I can't go outside because I'm embarrassed because I look like I have the mumps, like my skin is swollen, like all the things, right?
Oh my goodness.
So I can relate there. And I just think, again, just reiterating the point of just being open and realizing that everything, again, is a process. But even though it's a process, it does not hold permanence.
Yes, exactly.
So we're going to take another quick break right here on Group Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back right here on Group Portia. I'm Joe remotely with Dr. Sumita Khatri, and we're just having a great conversation, of course, about the importance of being open when you are going through any type of health-related journey. So, Sumita, I gotta ask this. When someone, and I can say this from personal experience from my mom, when my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer back in 2018, we noticed that, at least I did, I noticed that it didn't just affect her, it also affected our family. Me being her primary caregiver, and then others in the family, some of her friends also at the time were affected. And so, Sumita, how can families provide support for their loved one when they have some type of lung condition, whether it's lung cancer, asthma? How can they provide support, Sumita?
Most importantly, there's a few points that I've been thinking about. One is to support your loved one through getting answers. I mentioned already, knowledge is power. In most cases, there are things that can be done. And especially for something like cancer or COPD, like asthma, a lot of people have it and it's treatable, but it's frustrating in many cases and limiting, right? Can limit sports, etc. But for something like lung cancer and COPD, it seems like a death sentence to them because that's what they see. And families coming together, it can be two swings to the pendulum. One is like, oh, you can pray and you'll get over it, and that's like the whole, okay, but that's not enough. Then the other one is like, oh, I'm so sorry. I know. Then Aunt Minnie had cancer, and the Aunt Minnie stories start happening, right? Please, no Aunt Minnie, and no, like, pray and you'll be fine. Just support them through getting answers. That's the first point. The second one is don't let what others look like dissuade you. So you will remember someone that you saw at the mall who just was, walking, with an oxygen tank and maybe felt bad for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be you. And second of all, the person was at the mall walking, right? So just your story will be different. So don't like be that kind of a family member where your mind just goes there. And then I guess the third thing I would say is actively remove stigma. Actively remove it. Like, oh, mom, if only I've been telling you to stop smoking for how many years now, you wouldn't listen. Like, that's a natural thing to say, like, told you so, right? Avoid that. Go yell it into a canyon somewhere. Go to the metro parks and yell, okay? But do not say that to your loved one. So those are some of the things I would say initially. I have some other ideas afterwards, but those are the initial points that I wanted to make.
Sumita, I have to say, the Aunt Minnie story, I can relate tenfold on that. I can't tell you the number of times when my mom was diagnosed.
Yep.
There were, oh, well, Uncle so-and-so had this, or cousin Edward, who's related to this person who used to work in the auto industry. And
why? Why? Well, how does anybody ever really think that's helpful? I mean, that's really like, meaning to do well, but the most self-centered thing someone can do is an Aunt Minnie story, you know?
And I think even to the last point that you made about don't say, I told you should have stopped smoking or doing whatever extracurriculars that could have, quote unquote, made the condition
Yes.
worse.
Yes.
When how much proof do we truly have? I mean, little short story. You want to talk about stories? My great grandmother lived to be 102.
Wow.
And she smoked cigarettes for 75 years and never had a lung condition or anything. So again, everybody's genetics are different. Some people are more sensitive than others. And so, Sumita, how can we help to eliminate that stigma of pointing the finger at other things when a lot of times things may not be our fault, right? It's genetics, there's environmental factors. So how can we work towards eliminating that stigma of pointing the finger and instead provide an open platform and pointing to resources?
Thank you for asking that. It will take that strong caregiver who's going to be the bodyguard, right? The spirit guard, the bodyguard, right? The one which was probably you, who was just fending off negativity and focusing on what can be done and not woulda, coulda, shoulda. And what could be done are number one, keeping up spirits. Number two, keeping them active, right? Because it's easy to fall into this abyss and then not move and not exercise. And then then you get deconditioned, which just makes you worse. The other things I would suggest is if there are people who are smoking or things like that can be a sort of inspiration point for them to stop in honor of that person that, look, mom, I'm going to stop. I'm not going to come in with smoke on my jacket, right? Because that doesn't help anything. That just makes someone feel worse and makes their symptoms worse. Then being prepared. So as the primary caregiver, and by the way, primary caregivers need their own caregivers. Be prepared, things that, be organized with the medicine, put everything in a folder. You may not understand, just keep everything in one place, keep the meds, ask questions, get enough rest so you can sustain yourself as a caregiver. And then lastly, I would say foster a relationship with the physician's office, either like whoever it would be, either the physician or their nurse practitioner or their physician assistant or their nurse coordinator, somebody that is your go-to, where you can ask that dumb question, you get a good answer. There's no dumb questions, but the logistical stuff. So those are my tips. Like, just focus from the coulda, woulda, shoulda to, okay, so here we are. Let's move forward.
Yeah, when you talk about caregiving, and I've mentioned this a few times, caregiving is both rotten and rewarding at the same time.
It's so hard.
It's that duality. And for me, being that primary caregiver of my mother for the last couple years, I've seen the good and I've seen the bad, I've seen the worst. And one of the things that I can say for me was reminding myself to rest.
Yes, for sure. I've experienced the same thing. And I remember I was in medical school when my dad was ill. And I don't know, like, it was hard for me even to see him like that. I would be a little avoidant, and then I felt guilty about it. It was awful. And then my mom more recently, she's in assisted living now. And, it's, you never feel like you're doing enough. And then you end up phoning a friend and then you get help. Otherwise, you just cannot. You just break, you just see you're not exercising, you're not listening to music, you're not getting out in nature. You need to do that. Otherwise, guess what? Guess who's next? It's us. So I think the importance of self-care, it's so easy to say because not everybody can phone a friend. But if you're organized enough to be a caregiver, you're organized to delegate.
Oh, 100%. And Sumita, what did it take for you to set that boundary for yourself when you're going through med school and you're also being a caregiver of someone who has this condition. What did it take for you to set that boundary?
Oh, I don't know what boundaries I set back then. I was so young, you know, we all learn from our experiences. I don't know. I just felt like it's so funny because he had a bell and he'd ring the bell. And I just like when I'd hear the bell and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. And then the sadness of it all, because you saw him dwindling, right? So I'm not sure I did it well then, except just to love him and listen to his last words, you know, and I don't know. I was going to be a pediatrician after that because I couldn't handle seeing older people who were short of breath. And then after he died, I decided to do a little rotation in the ICU and go figure. Like that was my calling, right? Because I could communicate with people in the throes of death. So I just said, okay, I will see him in my patients. So that became my life purpose. And then I think more recently, you know, having your own children being that sandwich generation made it difficult too. But I think a loving family, 3 generations in our household, I think you just realize that everyone has their time to give and then time to receive. So, you know, but then also walks, nature, music. That's what I had to do. But I'll tell you, this pandemic was a doozy.
Oh, I can definitely relate there, Shamita, because during the time with my mom, I mean, she really started to decline, I would say, last year around June. And I was fortunate enough to become a full-time entrepreneur before my mom transitioned. So I was able to be here for her full time, but also find the balance, right? That's what we're talking about, finding that balance between being a caregiver of someone with a condition, but also reciprocating that same caregiver love to myself.
Yes.
Like, I'm thankful my mom had some independence, right? My mom could navigate around the house, and I could go for a couple hours from the house instead of being here 24/7, 365. Also, the good thing, the only thing I really had to help her do in the morning was get dressed, fix her breakfast, whatever she wanted, whether it was an omelet that I made or her coffee. And then if she wanted to, do something, I would chauffeur her oxygen tanks in the car, and, we go for a ride. So I'm grateful that I had more of, I would say, an easier journey of being a caregiver than some people. I can say some might have had it where they've had to hire other people to come in versus the way we had it set up at my house, where I could leave for a couple hours. Mom was fine watching TV or talking on the phone, doing her Sudoku or word searches.
Word searches, that's a thing.
Yeah. We used to compete. Funny story. We used to compete on who could finish one first in her. So, just finding those things to keep her occupied while I handle business. And still we had our time together. I was able to, some days I'll admit, some days were a little trying, but even on the trying days, I still found a way to cheer and triumph, knowing I got another day and another moment with my mom.
She sounds wonderful. And your reaction and how you managed it is also unique. I don't know that everyone would have had that kind of resilience. So I admire you for that.
Thank you. It was definitely, I would have to say, for our listeners who are tuning in, if any of you are in that same space of caregiving of someone, whether it's with a lung condition or anything, it starts with acceptance. Accepting that this is their journey, accepting that you're not going to be able to do all the things, but accepting that you giving them the amount of love that you can is enough. As long as you're showing up, doing the best that you can, setting boundaries. I have to enforce that. Setting boundaries and listening will help you to stay balanced within that caregiver role, where you're able to be the caregiver for this person and also reciprocate the same level of caregiver to yourself.
Right. Wouldn't you say, Portia, though, having a sounding board or two is a good thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. 100%. So we're going to take another quick break right here on Good Portia. Everybody stick with us. We will be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back right here on Girl Portia. Well, Dr. Sumita Khatri, thank you so much for coming on and sharing so much knowledge and wisdom with our listeners today about really equipping them with the right resources to not feel as though they have to inhale and exhale through a straw, that they're able to fully take deep breaths. So thank you so much in advance for coming on.
Sure.
And so, Sumita, I have to ask this. As a physician, you ask patients if they have questions right after you've explained what you think the condition is. And let's be honest, I've been that person where we might feel overwhelmed by all the terminology, the start of a treatment plan, potentially, depending on what it is. And so maybe Sumita, can you shed some light on what key questions do you recommend patients ask post, whether it's a diagnosis or treatment plan?
When you show up to a doctor's office with a constellation of symptoms, and it could be multiple things, shortness of breath comes from so many things, often all at the same time. And it's very reasonable to ask, okay, so I see this is what you're thinking, but what is it that I have? Like, what would you call it? And get an answer to that. And then to ask, why is it that I have this? Why did I develop this? But that's a very clear question. What is it? And why do I have it? And be prepared for the provider to say, it could be one thing, it could be multiple things. We're going to do some testing, but these are the possibilities. And it's really important for us to use lay language, right? Just to say, it could be something primarily lung, it could be lung and heart, it could be a little bit of that weight gain you had. But we're going to tease all that out. And probably in one or two more visits, we'll be able to really say what it is.
Sumita, I have to ask this. When you brought up just now about those two key questions, what is it and why do I have it? Mm-hmm. Why do you think, Sumita, it's so hard for us to really, for lack of a better word, get to the root, right? We often talk about, like you said, all the symptoms that we're having. I mean, shortness of breath can stem from several things, but what do you think it will take for more patients to feel a sense of empowerment to be direct? Like, what really is causing this? Paint the picture for me.
Yeah, I mean, as a patient in the room, one does not have to feel as vulnerable as one might naturally feel. And say, and often, like I know those of us who get some training in communication are sort of tasked with saying, so when you go back home, what are you going to say to your family about what we talked about today? And that can be a nice check-in, because after you've sort of had this conversation, and I try not to make it one way, it always should be two-way. But if they're able to say, well, it sounds to me, doctor, that you might think it's asthma, but it could be other things, and we're working on it. And then you're like, bingo. And that way they'll feel like, full circle. They came with a question. We came up with some ideas. We don't have all the answers, but we have some. So that in itself should be reassuring. But then if it's something as very clear, like, if a little kid comes in and they've had respiratory illnesses, they have allergies and they're wheezing, well, it's kind of obvious what it is. It's not 10 million things. It's likely asthma, but then you make sure you're not missing something else. But then when you can label it and name it, people can do their own homework about it, and not the Aunt Minnie homework. It's the going to the proper sources, getting empowered, coming back to a follow-up appointment sooner rather than later to make sure that when you've gone home and you're observing things with a clearer mindset and with an idea, that you come back with more relevant questions so you can continue to be better. That's why these things are important.
I can't stop laughing at the Aunt Minnie stories because I can say from personal experience how not helpful those are, because I think they tend to continue that hamster wheel of stuck.
Yes. Yes.
Because we hear this person in the family or this family friend had this and this was their experience, then it goes down a whole it's literally the effect of in the snow, right? When you don't have traction and your tires just keep digging.
Exactly. And the antidote to receiving those stories is to ask the second question I was thinking about, which is, how will this interfere with my life? And what can I do to prevent that? So that would be
the key.
Isn't it?
That's a key question. I mean, we gotta dig deeper, right? We have to feel a little vulnerable, to lack of a better word, get to the root.
Exactly.
How will this really affect my life? If I'm super active, will I be able to run my 5Ks every year?
Exactly.
If I'm someone who lives in a state such as Ohio that's plagued by all the seasons, our colder weather tends to linger a little longer. How will that have an impact on me moving forward? Do I need to potentially relocate to a state that has a warmer climate instead of staying in one that has the ups and downs of the coolness? And then let's not even factor in about allergy season or lots of pollen than now in the land of where we're still in the COVID season.
Right.
So really thinking about that and being transparent. Yes. I think as patients too, and I'm a patient too, we have to step into that boat of taking ownership.
Absolutely.
It's, we tend to, because of the way we grow up, I tell people we have to unlearn all the toxic ideologies and thought patterns and relearn new, healthier ones when we become adults. And I think there's this paradigm where when we reach the adult stage, whether we're 18, 35, 40, etc., where we're supposed to know everything, right? And that's not the case. We need to readopt the student for life approach. I'm sure you might know this book, Dr. Sumita. There's a book called The Game of Life by Florence Scovel Shinn. And one of the very first things in that book, it says, man is not your enemy. Man is not your friend, for man is your teacher. So every event, situation, person that you meet is an opportunity for you to learn if you're open to it.
That's profound. It is so true. I mean, the obstacles that we feel are punishments are really, it's easy to say when you're not going through something acute, but how do you grow from it? How do you learn from it? And also be prepared that in a chronic condition, it's going to take work and it's going to take time. There is no magic pill to this. Many of the ailments we have to do with our nutrition or lack of exercise. And, if we have allergies, we can't help that. It's the way we're built. But if we take our medicine properly or take our inhalers properly, then we'll be in a better fitness so that we can do the things where exercise is key, moving is key. I mean, what I see happening to people as they get older, and especially when it's cold outside, like they don't move anymore or they don't want to, they get discouraged and depressed. So one of the things that we talk about in pulmonary medicine that is so effective is pulmonary rehab. And it's like just going 3 times a week, just going. It sounds like just, but 3 times a week for, several weeks, 36 sessions, that people have outcomes that would be better than even surgical outcomes that were once presented. But it takes work and effort, just like it takes work and effort to learn to run, and it takes work and effort to lose weight. And it's not just losing weight, it's fitness. So sometimes the best solutions are the hardest ones. So be prepared for that too.
I love what you brought up just now, Shamita, about that, because you're so right. We overthink, and really it's taking that initial first step.
Yes.
That tends to be the hardest, is taking that first initial step. But once you do, you definitely won't regret it at all. Sumita, I thank you again for coming on and sharing with our listeners so much food for thought and wisdom. We're going to be wrapping up here soon, and I always love to save this question for last. You've equipped us, even myself, with a new way of thinking, a new approach to taking ownership of our healthcare, and even standing in the boat of courage and really asking those tough questions. Shamita, what words of inspiration can you leave with our listeners today? Whether it's someone who was once in your shoes, or if it's someone who's maybe recently diagnosed, they might have overcome whatever it was that they have, and they want to really make a difference in their community. What words of inspiration, Shamita, can you leave with our listeners today?
Become allies with your provider, because they want you better. They want to see you better, and there's no more fulfilling outcome for us than to see what was a barrier for our patients disappear. And we celebrate and we have so much fun, and we know it was from hard work, and that there will be bumps along the way, but that you've made it through in partnership because you were brave enough to ask and brave enough to follow a plan that works for you and be an example for others of resilience. I think that's what I'd like you to walk away with, is that others learn by watching.
Yes, we do. Indeed. What's the saying? Monkey see, monkey do. We learn by example. And I can say, Shamita, from my mom's journey, when my mom, I remember the day like it was yesterday, when my mom got her last radiation treatment. I remember us going out to celebrate her overcoming that boat of struggle for her. And she was able to be with us. We took her to dinner. We celebrated. We laughed. We listened to music. We did all the things, right? We want to encourage more of those days. And also, back to what you said, the partnership.
Yes.
We tend to think that in certain areas of our life, as we elevate, it's a one person band show. But no, it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to uplift an entrepreneur. And it takes a village to help someone who's plagued by a health wellness challenge to work through that.
Well said, Portia. I can't thank you enough for highlighting the importance of this work, and for you using your platform to share your knowledge.
Yeah, I do this in honor of my mom, because my mom was a former educator, as most people know, and she taught special ed. Oh. And my mom was always big on making everybody feel as though they could learn. And she did just that with each person who she touched, each student that has made it from being a stereotype of society to a college graduate to now owning their own business. So I'm a firm believer that anything is possible that you put your mind to. Well, everybody, that was Dr. Sumita Khatri that you heard from. And that concludes another episode of Grew with Portia, everybody. Thanks for listening, and have a good evening.